Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Charles Powell, and I'm very happy to introduce my good friend Sven Biscop, who is visiting us today. Sven is the director of the Europe in the World program at Egmont, which is the Royal Institute for International Relations in Brussels. And he has just published this book. This is Not a New World Order, which is a very brave statement. Good morning, Sven. Thank you very much for joining us. This is a brave title because people like Robin Niblett, our good mutual friend, former director of Chatham House, has written a book in which he claims that, in fact, we are moving towards a new Cold War. So would you like to summarize the main ideas in this wonderful new book you've just written?
Thank you for the invitation. I think we said that too quickly, that everything is new. But if everything is always new, how do you make policy? So I thought, sit back, take a deep breath, and then you realize that we've been living in the same multipolar world for 30 years. And actually, the entire history of world politics for 2,000 years is multipolarity, and the mechanisms don't change. Of course, great powers come and go, balance of power shifts. So the point of the book is not that there is nothing to worry about, but the point of the book is that we ought to know how this works, great power politics, and we better get used to it, or it could become a new world order in which we disappear from the scene, but we shouldn't.
And what are the main characteristics of this current situation of the international system? It's multipolar, obviously dominated to some extent, or large extent, by the US-China rivalry, and how does Europe fit in?
I think the important thing to realize is that the fact that we have peer competitors such as China is absolutely normal. And if you realize that, you also realize that the aim of our strategy, therefore, cannot be to make China small again. That will not happen. But even if it would happen, then another power would take its place. So the point is not to make our peer competitors disappear, but to manage the tensions that are inevitably there. And that puts you on a totally different strategic track, if you understand that.
And how effective is the EU at dealing with China? We seem to be rather divided internally. I always like reminding people that our motto is united in diversity. Sometimes there's more diversity than unity. We also seem to be united. Are we united in adversity, given our reactions to the Ukraine war? So how effective have we become?
I think we've lost the storyline a bit in the sense that the buzzword in Brussels now is geopolitics. Everybody calls everything geopolitical in response to the supposed novelty of the world. It's good that we realize that geopolitics is important because your geographic situation, where your resources are you need to import, where your export market is, that creates specific vulnerabilities. So it's best to be aware of those. But geopolitics is not strategy. Then you still need to know, okay, I have geopolitical issues, vulnerabilities. How do I deal with them? So I have the feeling the EU shouts geopolitics, but without really knowing, but what does it mean? To be more assertive is implied, okay, but assertive for which purpose? And then that's why I think we need to somehow specify the purpose again. And then my motto for you would be, keep the world together. Make sure that all the powers, everybody continues to interact with everybody, continues to trade, rather than see the world fall apart again.
Mm-hmm. We have two very important elections on the horizon, the European elections coming up in a few days, and then the US presidential elections in November. There seem to be two sort of prevailing narratives about both. The narrative about the European elections is that the far-right populist parties are going to do extremely well, that this will undermine the traditional sort of centre-left, centre-right consensus that had been dominant in the European Parliament, and that as a result of that, the EU will sort of be blown off course. Do you share this?
I'm always a bit puzzled as so many people say, we have so many elections this year and it's somehow a problem. I thought we were all in favor of elections.
But half of the world is voting.
Yeah. I have the feeling that at the European level, results will even themselves out and we'll have a normal majority still of what I would call normal democratic parties. But I'm more worried about some national elections. Some we've already had, more are coming up. Belgium has federal and regional elections also on Saturday. If they bring to power more right-wing populist governments, I think that could paralyze the Council, not so much the Parliament, but the Council of the EU.
Yes, that's a good point. We obsess about the European Parliament and forget that the Council is crucial. What about the other big election in the room, the United States presidential election? Again, the narrative here seems to be it's increasingly likely that Donald Trump will win, despite his judicial issues, which may actually even strengthen him, paradoxically. So pessimists are basically saying this is the end of the world as we know it. It's the end of the transatlantic relationship. It could be the end of NATO. Donald Trump will presumably, apparently, stop providing aid to Ukraine, and this obviously would place Europe and European defense in a very special position. How sanguine or hysterical should we be about this?
I'm inclined to say maybe we should focus on what we as EU should do anyway, quite regardless of who is the president of the United States. And then I think in all scenarios, we need to say, well, we need a European pillar within NATO that can stand on its own feet under the American nuclear umbrella, but that is operational. We need to be able to support Ukraine, even if the Americans drop Ukraine in military terms. Because I assume even if Biden wins, they will push us to do more. They will do less for Ukraine gradually. But I agree, Trump, if he's very radical, could cause problems. What if he creates a new trade war with China? Where do we go? But I would say the main issue is the unpredictability. I mean, does Trump know what he's going to do if he's president? I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm. And given that you're one of Europe's leading experts on European defense, which is a rather frustrating thing to be, I suppose, because you've observed and actively taken part and pushed these debates for many years now. Are we anywhere near the goal of becoming, for example, strategically autonomous? Are we in fact more strategically autonomous than we were before the Ukraine invasion?
With pain in my heart, I have to say absolutely not. It's exactly 25 years of common security and defense policy this year. There is very little to celebrate. We do operations and missions. I think that part of it works. We could do more, be more ambitious, but we do it. But in terms of generating more capability and aligning defense planning of EU member states, we have achieved almost nothing. And I think the reality is that in the end, Europeans, we do not trust each other enough. So we only trust defense integration if the Americans are in charge. So maybe we should shift the focus to NATO and say, okay, within the alliance, let us align what the European allies contribute so that altogether they create a complete force package with its own enablers that can do what they have to do even without American assets. But Supreme Allied Command Europe will remain an American, and that seems to be what it takes to make it work.
Can I change tack completely to conclude? The events in Gaza are very much on our minds, and I think it's pretty obvious that this is eroding confidence in Europe, in the so-called global south. We at Elcano prefer to use the term plural south because we think that's a more accurate description, but whatever the case. As you well know, in many of these countries, the EU is being accused of double standards. We are justifiably alarmed about what's going on in Ukraine. For us, it's an existential issue. But when we tell our Latin American friends or our African friends or our Asian friends that they should step up to the plate, most of them are quite reluctant, and they very often say, why aren't you similarly worried about the fact that 35,000 innocent, mainly women and children, have been killed in the last 6 months or so? What have we done wrong? Where has the EU failed to live up to its potential here?
I was very surprised that when the Hamas terrorist attack happened, apparently many leaders thought they had to choose either to continue to support the two-state solution for Palestine or to condemn terrorism. And then many chose to condemn terrorism and created the impression that therefore the EU sides only with Israel, throwing away 50 years of diplomatic tradition of a very strong, outspoken EEC and an EU support for the two-state solution. Of course, we should have said both. The end of a two-state solution doesn't justify the means, so it in no way justifies the terrorist attack, but it remains a very legitimate end. Of course, the EU is so divided on this. As long as Germany, for example, stays almost unconditionally behind the Israeli government, we will never be able to use the instrument of sanctions which I think otherwise we could and we should, in my view. So all we can do now, I think, is to prepare the diplomatic ground for, once the war in Gaza finally ends, setting up a new system of governance for Gaza, and then hopefully that can be a way to achieve a more global solution and finally get the Oslo agreements implemented.
As you know, Spain has recently recognized the state of Palestine together with Ireland, Norway and other countries. In Belgium, there are a lot of people who would favor that. What do you think we should expect from this decision in terms of the future developments in that region?
It will not change the facts on the ground immediately, of course, and indeed even countries that didn't yet recognize Palestine do de facto work with the Palestinian Authority almost as if it were a state. Well, I think it shows an important signal that we should now act upon, to say now we're really going for it and we will use all the instruments we have to finally implement a two-state solution, no matter how difficult that will be.
Well, thank you very much, Sven, for being with us this morning. And I strongly recommend all of our listeners and viewers to buy and above all read your book. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Charles.
Thank you.